There are many instances in history when the crown was not a reward but a hardship. But perhaps no queen has ever paid such a price for the throne as Anne. She got the empire, but with it 17 pregnancies, no adult children, illness, betrayal, and endless pain. She was a ruling queen, but in the eyes of many, she was a perpetually pregnant woman with nothing. Anne was born in 1665 in noisy, troubled England. Her father was the Duke of York, James, brother of King Charles II. Her mother was Anne Hyde, not a noblewoman by birth, but a woman of strong character, for whose sake James went against the will of the family. This union was not approved at court, and the birth of a daughter did not particularly please anyone. Anna grew up fragile from childhood. She had strange attacks of tearfulness. Her eyes were constantly streaming, as if she was crying even in her sleep. Later, she was severely ill with smallpox. The disease left a trace, not only on her body, but also in her character. When Anna was 6 years old, her mother died. Her father soon married the young Princess Maria of Modena. Despite her stepmother's benevolent attitude, this was another loss for Anna. Her mother was the only person before whom she could be just a child. With her death, the rest of her childhood ended as well. Interestingly, although her father was an ardent Catholic, he raised his daughters as Protestants. Politics demanded it. This decision would play a role in the future and cause a bitter rift between father and daughters. Anna grew up in the shadows. Her older sister Maria was bright, lively, the favorite of the court. Anna was quieter, more inconspicuous. Her childhood was spent in the long corridors of the palace, under the supervision of governesses, among books, prayers, and frequent illnesses. She played little, laughed little, but learned early to listen and memorize. With each passing year, she realized more and more that her life was not going to be easy, but she did not yet know how difficult her path would be, and how often she would have to hold on when her strength was almost gone. When Anne turned 18, it was time to marry. Her union with George of Denmark was a political decision, a marriage of interest, not sentiment. No one expected them to fall in love. He was a prince from the second line of the Danish dynasty. She was not the first beauty of the court. They were considered a suitable but not brilliant couple, but things turned out differently. From the first months of their life together, it was clear that a real, quiet, human warmth had developed between them. Georg turned out to be calm, good-natured, and surprisingly faithful. He was not a great strategist, did not strive for glory, but always stood by Anna, supported her, listened, and did not judge. It was a rare thing in royal families, a truly good marriage. At first, everything seemed encouraging. After the wedding, Anna became pregnant. There were whispers in the palace. Could this be the beginning of her new, happy life? But the child was born dead. The grief was quiet, suffocating. Anna did not make a scene, did not weep in front of the servants, but there was something fixed in her eyes, as if one of her internal mechanisms had frozen. But the loss did not separate her and Georg. On the contrary, it had brought them closer. They clung to each other tighter, as if they knew that this would not be the last pain. Over the next few years, Anna would be pregnant many more times, and again, loss. Sometimes miscarriages, sometimes stillbirths. Once, twins, one of whom was premature, the other barely 3 months old. Doctors would throw up their hands. Naming the approximate date of her birth was thought to bring death, but Anna did not complain. Her prayers were short and quiet. Lord, save at least one. As Anne lost one child after another, her world changed. In 1685, her father, James, Duke of York, became King James II of England. Anne was closer to the throne, but she felt no joy. She was increasingly preoccupied with illness, pregnancy, and worries about her husband, who was recovering and then coming down with a fever again. Jacob began to actively promote Catholics into power. He did not organize mass persecutions, but the Protestant majority of the country felt the pressure. Tensions were rising, and soon it exploded. England was invaded by William of Orange, the husband of her sister Mary. He claimed he wanted to protect Protestantism, but in fact, he claimed the throne. His father's army weakened, and his allies began to turn their backs on him. Anna was living next door to Jacob at the time. She knew of the impending invasion. She knew, and she kept silent. Moreover, she corresponded with her sister, supporting her plans. She didn't even try to warn her father. When Jacob was finally overthrown and fled the country, he uttered only one phrase which will be remembered by historians. Woe to him who cannot find support even in his own children. But Anna did not cry, neither then nor later. She just stayed in the same palace with the same face. She had her own pain, her own war, not for the crown, but for the lives of her unborn children. Soon, William and Mary ascended the throne. The sisters are now not just relatives, but formally subject and queen, and cracks began to appear in their relationship. At first, it was smooth sailing, but Anna felt that Mary did not trust her. She was strict, principled, sometimes cold, and more often allowed herself a barbed remark, especially after another tragedy. One day, after another stillbirth, Anna was lying in bed. She was weak, barely breathing. Maria came into the room, not to comfort her. She came in to rebuke her. "You're over-dramatizing," she said quietly. "You have to be stronger." Anna didn't answer. She turned her back to the wall. The sisters had hardly spoken since then. As if as a reward for her experiences, years later Anne gave birth to a strong boy. He was named William, Duke of Gloucester. He survived, he grew, he laughed. He ate with gusto, and the servants said, "Here he is, the future King of England." Anna never left her son's side. He became everything to her: air, hope, meaning. His room was always quiet and bright. Ivory toys, picture books, embroidered curtains. Anna picked out his clothes for him herself and personally asked the nannies how he slept and what he ate. She smiled genuinely for the first time in a long time. Georg was next to her, faithful and caring, a strong child, stability in the country. It seemed that God had finally turned his face to her, but the miracle did not last long. One day when the boy was 11, he fell ill. First, a slight weakness, then a high fever. A week later, he was gone. The court physicians were at odds. Some said inflammation of the brain. Others said infection. But what was the use? Anna didn't scream. She just sat by his bedside, held his already cold hand, and looked at his face, as if trying to memorize every feature. The servant said the queen hadn't eaten for days. She asked silently not to be disturbed, and when she finally left the room, she ordered it locked. Toys, books, blankets, everything was left untouched. The room was never to be opened. Never. Every year since then, on the day of the boy's death, the whole court has gone into mourning. It was an order. No music, no laughter, no balls, just silence and black ribbons. Anna's grief was silent but absolute. She no longer believed in miracles, and more often she was seen sitting in a chair by the window, motionless in black with a darkened look. In 1702, King William died. He and Mary had no children, and by law the throne passed to Anne. She was 37 years old, an age at which other women were already considering a quiet life rather than starting over. It was not easy to crown her. Anna could hardly walk. Her legs were swollen from constant illness and gout. She was brought to Westminster Abbey in a special carriage. Subjects stood along the streets, throwing flowers, waving handkerchiefs. The people welcomed her with joy. But beneath the heavy ceremonial dress hid a weary body, a body that could no longer cope. During the coronation, Anna hardly stood up. The servants discreetly supported her under her elbows while the archbishop laid the crown. At that moment, she felt no triumph, only weakness, but she knew there was no choice. One must rule. Anne took control, as quietly and firmly as she had done everything in her life. She wasn't a brilliant politician, but she knew how to listen, and most importantly, she knew how to trust those who deserved it. She surrounded herself with experienced advisors. She supported theater, poets, musicians. It was she who gave a knighthood to Isaac Newton. Her signed decree survives to this day. Under her rule, Britain went through the War of the Spanish Succession and came out of it not only victorious, but richer. Anne signed the Act of Union, and Scotland was officially united with England. And so, Great Britain was born. She hardly ever left the palace. Her health was failing, but the country grew stronger and stronger. And yet, despite her victories, she remained a woman who had lost all her children, and with each passing year, this was felt more acutely. The lavish clothes, the brooches, the crown, the embroidered shoes, it all seemed luxurious. But beneath the queen's robe was a sickly, exhausted body. Anne could hardly move on her own. Gout had plagued her for years. Every step she took was accompanied by a searing pain. Servants lifted her under her arms and put her in the carriage in which she traveled around the gardens. Eventually, she stopped getting up altogether. Her body changed in her old age. It became heavy, swollen. Doctors recorded that Anna's weight at the end of her life was about 150 kilograms. Under her dress was always tightly tied bandages. They hid trophic ulcers that did not heal for months. No one dared discuss it out loud. But rumors were flying. Some courtiers allowed themselves to smile behind their backs. Someone even laughed once in the crowd, loudly, angrily. Anna stopped the carriage, looked at him, and said calmly, without raising her voice, "This body has taken more pain than you will endure in a lifetime." She was silent more often than she spoke, but there was strength in her, not theatrical, but an inner strength, hard, persistent, a strength you can't see at first glance, the strength to get up every day when you don't want to live anymore. She wasn't afraid of healers, but they rarely helped. They gave her bloodletting, cauterized ulcers, leeches, and made her drink potions that made her vomit. Sometimes at night there were muffled moans from her chambers, but Anna didn't complain. She just kept quiet and continued to rule. By 1714, Anne was barely out of bed. She was no longer signing papers with her own hand, only approving what was read to her. Her face was swollen, and her breathing became labored. More and more often, she was lost in thought, forgetting who was around her, but there was still a proud silence in her. The doctors walked the corridors, talking in whispers. They knew she didn't have long to live. When her last days came, the servants remembered her asking for the window to be opened. Cold air came into the room. Somewhere far beyond the walls of Westminster, it was raining. Everything was calm, almost as calm as ever. Anna called the priest and asked him to bring the gospel. She held it on her chest for a long time without opening it. She seemed to be saying goodbye not only to her life, but also to those she could not hold on to. Her last words were, "May suffering never happen again." Anna was 49 years old. She had no living children, no husband, no sister, but there was a country she had changed forever. After her death, she was long called weak-willed, a woman who couldn't cope with her fate. But as the years passed, history revised that judgment. It turned out that Anne was more than just a queen. She was a person who stood her ground where others would have given up. She went through 17 pregnancies, and none of her children grew. She suffered in silence, almost daily, and in doing so, she created what would later be called the British Empire. Queen Anne left no heirs, but she left a mark.